Hello, everybody. So today I was gonna go on an all-out attack against the Mass of Paul VI, the ordinary form, as Pope Benedict called it. But I changed my mind. I'll go more deeply into the different deficiencies of the new rite. But right now, this video is shouldn't be too long. Pretty short, I think. It is basically the words of Pope Paul VI himself condemning his own rite, showing us that it is not the Roman Rite. It is not the Roman Catholic Rite. It is a new rite. It is an innovation. It is a novelty. And these are the very words of Pope Paul VI himself, who introduced this novelty into the church. Now, just to start off, I'm not saying that the Mass as it is in most Catholic churches of the Roman Rite is invalid, or that the Christ is not truly present when the bread and wine are consecrated by the priest. I'm not saying that. Um, what I'm saying is it is actually not a Catholic rite. It doesn't come to us from the apostles. It is an innovation. It is a change. It is a novelty. It is not the Roman Rite. And furthermore, this is from the words of Paul VI himself. So Benedict tried to kind of play word games by calling it the ordinary form, and the real Roman Rite calling it the extraordinary form. There's no such thing. It's the real Roman Rite and the fake Roman Rite. All right, and so as I'm gonna dwell into a lot of the different deficiencies of the rite in future videos. I mean, but as I said, if you have absolutely no option of finding a true Roman Rite Mass, or at least an Eastern Rite, like a Byzantine or a Coptic or an Armenian Catholic Mass to attend, at least they maintain the traditional rites, because they contain the faith, the rite of prayer, the way you pray, the words you pray, and how you adore, inform you of the faith of the apostles. It is not just it's not just a ceremony. It embodies the way of prayer, embodies the faith handed down to us from our fathers, 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 fathers. And it contains more of the faith than in a book. Anyways, so I will go into it. So as I said, if you have no other options, definitely attend in the new Mass of Paul VI, the new rite of Mass, which is not the Roman Rite, and hopefully try to find a church where the priest is reverent. He tries to celebrate the Mass with reverence and devotion, and at least as Orthodox, preaching the Catholic faith pure as much as possible these days. And definitely, I mean, you go to receive the body and blood of Christ. I mean, for me, I will go to the new Mass if I have no other option, or if I miss the traditional rite, or I can't go to. So I will still go. It is a pain, and it's because I know that I feel pain at seeing sacrilege and false doctrine, or watered down Mickey Mouse Catholicism. Catholicism light. It's painful, but I will go just to be in the presence of Christ and to receive Him. Anyways, I don't want to delay too much longer. Paul VI, what did he say? And I'll put a link below the video for you to click and read his very words. Of course, he has his excuses amongst the words, but here's the true gems. So I'm just kind of shifting my view to read it for you. So this is from Paul VI address to a general audience on November 19th, 1969. It's Paul VI, Pope Paul VI. So here he goes. Our dear sons and daughters, number one, we wish to draw your attention to an event about to occur in the Latin Catholic Church. The introduction of listen to this, the introduction of the liturgy of the new rite of the Mass, not the Roman Rite. It's the new rite of the Mass. And then he goes on to other things, and then he goes, the Mass will be celebrated in a rather different manner. It's not the same, it's in a different manner from the one which you have been accustomed to. Celebrate it in the last 4 centuries, from the reign of St. Pius V after the Council of Trent down to the present. Now here, Paul VI is trying to kind of pretend that his deform, his innovation, his novelty is somehow comparable to Pius V of the Council of Trent. So he's saying, oh, the Mass you've been celebrating for 400 or 500 years is just, from Pius V. Not true. Pius V codified the Mass of Pius V, the so-called Tridentine Mass. It's actually the Roman Rite. It was the same. It's a standardization of the exact same rite of Mass of the Roman Church, of the Diocese of Rome, of the Roman Curia. It is the same rite, which was the same books of 100 years before, 200 years before, 300 years before. Maybe certain chants were not maintained, because at that time there was no standardization. Each cathedral would have actually a rite for the cathedral with additional prayers and so forth. So Pius V did not invent a new rite. He just presented the Roman Rite of the Roman Curia of the Diocese of Rome, and as solid as a standard. And he actually said to all the churches throughout the world, Roman, Catholic, or Latin rites, if you have a rite like the way of celebrating Mass, which is older than 200 years, you are totally free to maintain it. He didn't force anybody to take over his missal, the missal of Pius V. No. He said, you have a right. And the reason being said, he said 200 years, because he tried to stop the innovations, the destruction of the liturgy, which destroys the faith, which was happening during the Protestant Reformation. So it was Luther, a Catholic priest, and Calvin, other Catholic priests. They are the ones who started destroying the liturgies, changing them, removing this and deleting that, and adding this, specifically to change the faith of the people. Okay? So he said, anything beyond 200 years, keep it, go ahead. Because at least 200 years ago, this Protestant errors were not in vogue. So you can say the liturgy has not been infected with errors. And there in the West, there's tons of different rites. The Sarum Rite in England, there's the rites of the Milan, the Ambrosian Rite, the Masoretic Rite, the Dominican Rite, the Carthusian Rite, the different religious orders. They had their own rites too, and even the different cathedrals, even Paris, they had their own type of. Still, in 95% is still the Roman Rite, but it is slightly different. But it is fully Catholic. It grew throughout the centuries by the faith of the saints. It's not the innovation of Paul VI. So this line of Paul VI in his address to the people is to fool those who are uninformed. But his deception has become clear. So he continues. This change has something astonishing about it. That's his words. Paul VI's very words. This change has something astonishing about it. Something extraordinary. It's not some renovation. It's not something it's not the same rite. This is because the Mass, and actually we're talking here now about the rite of the Mass, but actually Paul VI, of unhappy memory, one of the greatest, worst popes in the history of the church. Maybe Jorge Bergoglio would match him, but actually Paul VI is even worse, because he's the one who introduced all these changes to every single rite of every single sacrament of the Latin Roman Church. It wasn't just the Mass. So in this case, here we go. So it has here this change has something astonishing about it. It is something extraordinary. This is because the Mass is regarded as the traditional and untouchable expression of our religious worship. and the authenticity of our faith. See that? So when you touch that, when you play with that, you are changing the authenticity of the faith. You are changing the religious worship. And then Paul VI is talking, continues. We ask ourselves, so he's talking about himself. So we ask ourselves, hey, self, how could such a change be made? What effect will it have on those who attend Holy Mass? Answers will be given to these questions, and to others like them, arising from this innovation. This innovation. That's his words again. And of course, we know the answers. Look at the statistics for Mass attendance since the introduction of the new rite. From there to virtually the bottom, from the most Catholic countries like France and the Netherlands to being the most atheistic countries. And even the US, the decline in Mass attendance is astonishing. Not only Mass attendance, vocations to the priesthood and religious life destroyed. The faith of the faithful, of the Catholics, has been destroyed, because even 90% people, Catholics, who still attend Sunday Mass, I would say 90% of them know very little about the faith. It's not just about being nice and hospitable and being welcoming to migrants. And no, what is the faith? What do you believe? If you tell them, I bet you anything, if you tell Catholics attending the Catholic to any parish, tell them, is the Catholic faith the only true faith? Is the Catholic Church the only true church? They will say, no, not really. I mean, we have our, Protestant brethren and Orthodox brethren. Hey, I have relatives who have defected to the Protestant sects, and I have relatives who have been born into Orthodoxy. I'm an Eastern Rite Catholic myself. So 300, 400 years ago, my ancestors were Orthodox. But again, 700 years previous, they were Catholic before the schism with Rome and Constantinople. But anyways, the truth is the truth. So the effects are clear to anyone with eyes to see. Don't listen to me. Go Google it. Look at Mass attendance charts. Go belief of Catholics. Catholics don't believe anything. They're pro-abortion. They know nothing about the faith. They're doctrinally ignorant. And I'm not blaming the Catholic faithful. I'm blaming the Pope Paul VI. I'm blaming the popes since Vatican II. I'm blaming the bishops. I'm blaming the parish priests and religious. Those are the people I blame. And above all, Paul VI, because the liturgy conveyed the faith, even if the priest said nothing. All of you had your missal with you, the prayers of the missal themselves taught you the faith. You didn't need the priest to say a word. Anyways, so Paul VI here continues. So first of all, talks about some of the people who might criticize this change. And he says that these people might come to believe, and that's a quote, they might come to believe that the equation between the law of prayer, lex orandi, and the law of faith, lex credendi, is compromised as a result of these changes. And guess what? And he says, it is not, absolutely not. Anybody, I challenge you, go on the internet if you don't have a missal of the traditional Roman Rite, of the Catholic Roman Rite. Compare it with the prayers of the new Rite. It's head to head. And you will immediately see there's a difference. The faith of pure Catholicity of the ancient Rite compared to the compromised, wishy-washy language, no condemnation, no judgment of the prayers of the new Rite are clear, and which, of course, compromise the faith. So, of course, he continues his defense. He says, the Mass of the new Rite, again, that's Paul VI, of the new Rite, is and remains the same Mass as we always have. And, of course, he's talking specifically meaning the same Mass being the Mass is the Mass. You go to any Rite, Catholic, Orthodox, Byzantine, whatever, that is a Mass because the consecration of the body and blood of Christ happens, and you receive the true God made man. So that is the Mass. So technically, yeah, it's the same Mass because the Mass is the Mass, but it is the new rite, which is not the Roman Rite. And then he says, point 15, actually, he says, in like manner, we reply to the third question, what will be the results of this innovation? He admits it. He admits it's an innovation. Well, we know from fact, from history, that the result of this innovation is the destruction of the faith, the destruction of the faith, the destruction of the faith, which is equal to the loss of souls. That is the result of this innovation. Pope Montini. So he ends his audience speech. He says, so let us not talk about the new Mass. Let us rather speak of the new epoch in the Christian life. Well, he himself didn't call it the new Mass. He called it the new Rite. It's not the Roman Rite. It's the new Rite of Mass. And he talks about a new epoch. Yeah, the epoch of the destruction of the faith, the epoch of faithlessness, the epoch of apostasy. That is the fruits of the great Mass of Paul VI. But as I said before, it's not just the Mass that has been changed. Every single rite in the administration of every single sacrament, the 7 sacraments of the Church, have been changed for no reason. Well, there is a reason. They made them more, according to the people who helped formulate the new Mass, and according to the author, the real architect, Annibale Bonini, of the new Rite, it was done specifically to make the rites of the Catholic Church more acceptable to Protestants. Now, I don't condemn anybody. I'm just saying Protestants, for a Catholic, they do not hold the same faith. They are the children of Luther and Calvin, who changed the Apostolic Christian faith, which comes to us from the apostles. So we change the Mass and the other rites of the sacraments, which come to us through the centuries of Christian faith. We remove what is offensive to them to make them more acceptable to them. That innovation. Look at how many Catholics have defected to Protestant sects, from Pentecostalism to fundamentalism to all that. And as I said before, I do not hate anybody. I do not hate Protestants or Orthodox. I wish them the best, especially, for my own family members who have defected to these erroneous doctrines. They are not Christian. There is one Christian faith because it comes from Christ himself. Any defection in the doctrines of the faith is defection from Christ, period. So I hope they are enlightened, find a good priest and a good church, and rejoin the one and only Church of Christ. So here we go, continuing with Paul VI's condemnation of his own rite. So this one comes from his audience. I guess a few days later. He couldn't shut up, but actually this has even more treasures in it. That's from November 26th, 1969. So this is what our beloved destroyer of the Roman Rite, Paul VI, has to say. Our dear sons and daughters, we ask you to turn your minds once more to the liturgical innovation of the new rite of the Mass. Do we need any discussion that the Mass in most Catholic churches is not the Roman Rite? It is the liturgical innovation of the new rite of the Mass. It's not the Roman Rite. It's an invention. It's the fabricated liturgy. It's the banal, on-the-spot fabricated liturgy, as Cardinal Ratzinger, before he became Pope Benedict XVI himself, stated. So, that's the words of Paul VI. A liturgical innovation of the new rite of the Mass. Okay, so, and then Bunch of words. Continues, number 2. A new rite of the Mass, again, the words of Paul VI, not me. A change in the venerable tradition that has gone on for centuries. This is something that affects our hereditary religious patrimony. See how grave that is? Which seems to enjoy the privilege of being untouchable and settled. It seems to bring the prayer of our forefathers and our saints to our lips and to give us the comfort of feeling faithful to our spiritual past, which we kept alive to pass it on to the generations ahead. So all of that, throw it in the garbage. Throw it in the garbage for what? To please our separated brethren, for an innovation that seeks to water down the faith and led to the destruction of the faith, the destruction of souls, destruction of churches and monasteries and orders. Anyways, continues. Our beloved Pope Montini, destroyer of the Roman Rite. This change will affect the ceremonies of the Mass. We shall become aware, perhaps, with some feeling of annoyance, that's stating it mildly, that the ceremonies at the altar are no longer being carried out with the same words and gestures to which we were accustomed. He admits it. New rite, innovation, novelty, ceremonies changed, prayers changed. Number 4, he continues, we must prepare for this many-sided inconvenience. Is that an inconvenience? You're ripping to shreds the spiritual, liturgical heritage of the Roman Church. And you call it an inconvenience. He continues, our beloved destroyer of the Roman Rite, Paul VI, continues, it is the kind of upset caused by every, here's the magic word, novelty. Novelty that breaks in our habits. We shall notice that pious persons are disturbed most. So the people who actually pray the most, who love the Mass the most, who attend the liturgies the most, who are do their spiritual reading the most, who pray their rosaries every day, the real pious people, these people who love the church and her traditions and her heritage, the prayers which have come to her from 1,000 years ago, these who we should be taking care of, these people will be, according to Paul VI, will be disturbed the most. Because they have their own respectable way of hearing Mass. And they will feel shaken out of their usual thoughts and obliged to follow those of others. Even priests may feel some annoyance in this respect. And he continues, the guy doesn't care. Destroy the liturgy. Who does he think he is? No pope has the right to destroy the liturgy of the church. No pope has that right. He is not God. He is not God. Can you imagine a successor of Aaron saying, you know what? I see these rites coming down to us from God. The rites of the Mass which come to us from the apostles, no matter where they are, whether they're Malabar Rite or the Carthusian Rite. They come to us from the apostles, East and West. And have more power and more dignity than the rights given by God himself, because these as well were given by God through Christ in the Old Testament. Imagine Aaron and Moses saying, you know what, I know God said offer incense at that time of year in this manner. You know what? I don't think so. You know what? We're going to change the time of year and we're not going to offer incense. Maybe we'll offer, I don't know, maybe why bother with incense? It smells. We don't want incense. let's just offer some prayers. Or let's, you know what? God said offer a lamb for this sacrifice. You know what? I'll offer a pigeon instead. That's good enough. God doesn't mind. Can you imagine? So Paul VI, he thinks he's God. So he continues. Number 5. Did I miss something here? Let me just give me a second here. Yeah, the annoyance part. Okay, number 5, kids. This novelty, again, it's not the Roman Rite, people. This novelty is no small thing. It's no small thing. So anybody, any priest, any bishop, any pope who tells you, yeah, you know, these were like little changes in the Mass. Oh, we think good with this and we think good with that, but it's all the same. It's all good. It's still the Roman Rite. No, it's not. Paul VI says it's an innovation, it's a novelty, it's a new rite that will shake people. And he says here, this novelty is no small thing. We should not let ourselves be surprised by the nature or even the nuisance of its exterior forms. So he admits it's not a small thing, and the exterior forms of the new rite, his new rite, is a nuisance. That's the word he himself uses. So when people get bored of the new Mass, I can sit down for an hour and a half on the new rite. Last Sunday, there was a Feast of the Epiphany. It wasn't just the Mass. So it was a high Mass, and then there was exposition of the Blessed Sacrament and prayers, just because it's a big feast. And instead of lasting an hour and 15 minutes, an hour and a half, it was 2 hours by the time everything ended. And people were still, after everything was gone and the priest left, people were still on their knees praying. It's unbelievable, the ancient liturgy. And kids, children, I don't know, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, 6-year-olds, sitting in front of me. 2 solid hours. Sitting, praying, watching others pray. And when they were getting tired of kneeling, they would sit down, quiet. 2 solid hours. Can you imagine? People don't last 40 minutes, 35 minutes in the new Mass, and the kids are fidgeting and they can't sit still. Anyways, so here we go. This novelty is no small thing. We should not let ourselves be surprised by the nature or even the nuisance of its exterior forms. We should find out as much as we can about this innovation. Then he continues, we shall do well to take into account the motives, which we know, of this grave change. So it's not a small matter. And the change in the rite is a grave change. Paul VI says it's a grave change. Then, of course, because he's God, he says, this new change is why? It's the breath of the Holy Spirit, which calls the church to make this change. Okay, so we have a seer, so we have a pope who can directly talk to the Holy Spirit, and he can impose his will upon the whole church because he thinks he himself can hear the Holy Spirit and he can decide what is the will of the Holy Spirit. It's actually the will of Benini and his minions who changed the church. And then he continues, this moment is shaking the church, which is true. I should have looked up I'm not going to look into it now, but you can look it up. Paul VI himself has an address after a few years of the grave change, this innovation, this new rite. He himself says something went wrong. He says, the church, the Catholic Church, look it up. He says it is suffering an auto-demolition, a self-destruction. And it looks like, that's what Paul VI himself says, it seems like the smoke of Satan has entered the church as through an opening, a fissure. As Paul himself says, what is this opening? What is this fissure? What is this? It's definitely the new rites of, especially the Mass, because that's what people mostly are used to. and the Vatican II itself, the council, because it's a vague pastoral council, as the council itself declares. It is not a dogmatic council; it's just a pastoral council talking about, oh, we should do this, and it's very vague. Could be understood in an Orthodox Catholic way with some difficulty, and much more easily it could be twisted and turned into a complete innovation, modernist. Heresy, because you can destroy the meaning and change it. So it is a council which says the true and the false at the same time, and depending on the hearer and the reader, how you want to interpret it. So Paul himself says, he says here, the moment is shaking the church. And a few years later, he says, the smoke of Satan has entered the church. And the Catholic Church is suffering an auto demolition, is self-destruction. Thank you, Paul VI. Thank you, New Mass. It's frustrating, I tell you. Anyways, I'm not mad. Well, I am mad, actually. I'm pissed. Not at the people, not at Catholics. Because Catholics have been deceived. And their faith has been destroyed. That's what makes me mad. That's the reason. Anyways, let's continue with our beloved Paul VI. In number 8 in the little speech here, he says, it is here that the greatest newness is going to be noticed. He admits it's a newness, it's an innovation, it's a change, grave change. The newness of language, no longer Latin. Even though Vatican II itself states that Latin is to be maintained in the Latin rites. And notice Vatican II is the Latin rites, so meaning Carthusian Rite, Ambrosian Rite, Dominican Rite, the different rites of the Catholic Church, the Masoretic Rite, the Roman Rite. So even Vatican II uses the Latin language is to be maintained in the Latin rites. But here, pretending to follow the council, Paul VI says, it is here that the greatest newness is going to be noticed. The newness of language. No longer Latin, but the spoken language will be the principal language of the Mass. Now, I'll continue his little quote here, but I don't want to dwell on it too much. I wouldn't be so mad or so agitated if all that Paul VI did was say, you know what? Even though the councils had maintained the Latin rite, the Latin language, at least have one Mass every Sunday completely in Latin in the traditional form. That maintains the unity of the church. So I can travel to Australia, I travel to Singapore, I travel to Hong Kong, I travel to Germany, I travel to wherever, Argentina. I can take my missal, my English Latin missal, and go to the Mass and follow everything completely and understand everything completely. Even the readings. The only thing I will not understand is the preaching of the priest, because he will be speaking Spanish, for example. He will be speaking, I don't know, Chinese or Cantonese or Mandarin or German. It's the only thing, but I will fully participate in the liturgy, as they like to say. Completely. If he speaks French, speak German, it doesn't matter. But now, if you go to wherever, I go to Germany, if I go to the Fabricated Liturgy of Paul VI, everything is in German. I don't know. I have to kind of guess. Oh yeah, that's where the holy comes. Oh yeah. I cannot follow. Impossible. So now you're actually dividing the church. So, but again, as I said, so my solution would have been, okay, fine, have the traditional rite, the Mass in Latin at least once a week, every Sunday for everybody, and the being the main Mass. But you can't have a completely vernacular, like an English or a French, literal or as literal as possible of the Real Roman Rite. No problem. You can have even Gregorian chant, but in the vernacular, but again in a high language. So I'm not talking about the base English translation, but kind of an elevated English translation, an elevated French translation, an elevated Spanish translation of the liturgy. But you maintain, but at least all the prayers are the same, all the gestures are the same faith is conveyed through the centuries, the music, the chant, even though it might not fit perfect, but it is possible to even sing it in the vernacular. All of that would be maintained, but it has to be accurate. But that's not what happened. The whole prayers and ceremonies and rites and gestures, everything changed. Not changed to the better, changed completely to the worst. To the worst. So, and one final point on this point on the language, to show you actually maybe one these days it's almost saying, you know what, we can't afford to have a vernacular. Simple thing. For decades, the formula of consecration. This is my body and this is my blood. So for the consecration of the blood. So the priest would say this is he speaks in the name of Christ as Christ. This is my blood, which will be shed for you and for all. That's the word they used, for you and for all. Even though the Latin says for you and for many. And people might start arguing, oh, you know, the Latin could be understood as for all. Not true. Every single translation of the Missal into English and into Spanish and into French translated as for many. And if you don't want to rely on the translation, the Gospels themselves, Christ himself says that this is my blood. It shall be shed for you and for many, not for all. And the Council of Trent, I believe in the Catechism of the Council of Trent. If you want a solid catechism or to find the true doctrine, Catechism of Council of Trent gets to the point clear. You can look into it. But again, in one section, I believe it says, it addresses that point in the 1500s. It wasn't waiting for Vatican II or the new Mass. It basically says that Christ said, this blood is shed for many, not for all, because the fruits of the sacrifice of the Mass, the fruits of it are applied to the many being those faithful who attend the sacrifice, the Catholics holding the faith, who receive the body and blood of Christ, even though his sacrifice on the cross was for all, for the whole of humanity. It's efficacious for all, but the fruits of the sacrifice are for the many. That is in the Catechism of the Council of Trent. If you want to just buy one catechism, buy that one. Anyways, so let's continue with our little beloved Popey here. No longer Latin, but the spoken language will be the principal language of the Mass. The introduction of the vernacular will certainly be a great sacrifice for those who know the beauty, the power, and the expressive sacrality of Latin. Sacrality is like sacredness. We are parting with the speech of the Christian centuries. We are become like profane intruders in the literary preserve of sacred utterances. We will lose a great part of that stupendous and incomparable artistic and spiritual thing, the Gregorian chant. Do you see the loss? Do you see the loss? Immeasurable loss. Paul VI himself admits it. He condemns his own work with his own words. How can anyone accept this? How can any bishop have accepted this? A few bishops rose and said, no, this is not possible. I will maintain the faith which was handed to me. I will maintain the rites, the Mass and the sacraments which were given to me and handed to me from my fathers and fathers' fathers and fathers' fathers' fathers. I will not abandon and throw in the garbage the heritage of hundreds, thousands of years. Then Paul VI continues. He says, we have reason indeed for regret. And why are you doing it? Why? Reason almost, Paul VI continues, reason almost for bewilderment. What can we put in the place of that language of the angels? We are giving up something of priceless worth. But why? That's himself. He says, but why? What is more precious than these loftiest of our church's values? I'm getting all out of breath here. So he continues. The answer will seem banal and prosaic. Well, because it is banal and prosaic, Paul. Yet it is a good answer. It is. Trust me, it's a good answer. Believe me, I'll destroy everything, but it's a good answer while we're destroying everything. Because it is human. Because it is apostolic. Actually, it is, it might be human, but it's definitely not apostolic. It's not even human. People like stability. People like sameness, especially if something, a heritage, a treasure, an inheritance you have received. It is human to preserve that. It is human to love what your fathers and fathers' fathers have given you. Not talking about what the apostles and their successors, that the ancient fathers of the church have passed on to us from a treasure of music and chant and prayer and liturgy and rites and sacraments and music and doctrine. It is human to love and to hold and to preserve and to pass on that heritage, that treasure, that, as you say, Paul, loftiest of our church's values. It is neither human nor apostolic. And he continues in point 15. Of course, he tries to justify all of that. But anyways, he continues. Finally, if we look at the matter properly, we shall see, like, what the matter is talking about. He's talking about the new rite of Mass. Finally, if we look at the matter properly, we shall see that the fundamental outline of the Mass is still the traditional one. Not only theologically, but also spiritually. So only the outline of the traditional Mass is still left. Yeah, I guess it's pretty much the same outline, but it's not the same rite. He admits it. So everything other than the outline has been preserved. That's what he says. If we look at the matter properly, so we even have to kind of concentrate to see it, we shall see that the fundamental outline of the Mass is still the traditional one. And of course, remember, he changed the rites of every single sacrament other than the Mass. Ordinations, extreme unction, confession, marriage, baptism. Hey, you might as well destroy everything. And he concludes. So at that time when he wrote it, the Roman Missal, the traditional rite, was still there while he was introducing his new rite. So here's the final point he makes here. For the Latin text, so he says here's the quote. For the Latin texts, priests who celebrate in Latin, in private but also in public, in cases provided for by the legislation, may use either the Roman Missal or the new rite until November 29, 1971. So you can use the Roman Missal or the new rite. So here you go. Paul VI himself, again, makes clear the Roman Missal is different than the new rite. Clear. And then he babbles on at the end. But we see the Roman Rite is different than the new rite introduced by Paul VI, written by Bernini and his Protestant collaborators. What can I say? Should I continue with this? You know what? I will continue a couple more words. Shouldn't take more than 5 minutes. Hopefully I haven't bored you. Let's see here. Okay, yeah, actually I will continue. Couple of little things. So, here in the Council of Trent, the dogmatic, the Counter-Reformation Council, the dogmatic Council of Trent, which re-declared the Catholic faith whole and entire. So in in the seventh session, celebrated on the third day of March 1547, decrees concerning the sacraments. So in Canon 13, it says, if anyone, which includes the Pope, says that the received and approved rites of the Catholic Church, accustomed to be used in the administration of the sacraments, may be despised or omitted by the minister without sin, and at their pleasure may be changed by any pastor of the churches to other new ones, let him be anathema. Let him be condemned. Let him be anathema. If anyone says, and that they may be changed by any pastor. No pope has the right to change the rites of the church. And then in the creed, when the Catholic Church has a creed, a credo, like the Nicene Creed, the Apostles' Creed, that is a dogmatic definition. It is immutable and irreformable. It is eternal. It is like the Athanasian Creed as well, one of the greatest creeds. So, in the creeds, Professio Fidei Tridentina, Creed of Pope Paul VI, the profession of faith of the Tridentine profession of faith, Creed of Pope Pius IV. So the Professio Fidei Tridentina, also known as the Creed of Pope Pius IV, is one of the four authoritative creeds of the Catholic Church. It was issued on November 13th, 1565 by Pope Pius IV and his bull in unicum nobis. I'm not sure if I'm saying it right or not. Under the auspices of the Council of Trent. So anyways, so here's the creed, and I'll put links to all of that. I, so you say your name, I, so-and-so, with a firm faith, believe and profess each and everything which is contained in the creed, which the Holy Roman Church makes use of it. To wit, I believe in one God, blah, blah, blah. And then continuation in the creed, the belief, the apostolic and ecclesiastical traditions, and all other observances and constitutions of the same church, I firmly admit to and embrace. We can't throw them away. You accept them, you admit them, and embrace them. All apostolic and ecclesiastical traditions, which of course includes the rites of Mass and the sacraments. Then he continues. Again, I'm skipping the rest of the creed. I'm just getting to the point regarding the rites of the church. I also, remember, that is the creed of the church, and you are professing that creed. I also receive and admit the accepted and approved ceremonies of the Catholic Church in the solemn administration of the aforesaid sacraments. So all the 7 sacraments. That is in the creed. And then he continues the rest of the creed, and then he says, this true Catholic faith, outside of which no one can be saved, which I now freely profess, and to which I truly adhere, I do so profess and swear to maintain inviolate and with firm constancy, with the help of God, until the last breath of my life. So holding on and admitting the ancient rites and sacraments and ceremonies of the church is part of the Catholic faith. You can't reject them. You can't decide, I'm going to make new ones. Not even the Pope can do that. Nobody can do that. You can restore, you can allow some minor changes here and there. So I will finally end with a quotes, which I found actually from a 1989 publication of the Fatima Crusader. 1989. It's entitled, Let Catholics Have the Traditional Mass, talking about John Paul II. And it's a defense of the traditional Mass compared to the new. So in that, there's 2 footnotes. And there's a footnote from Cardinal Juan de Torquemada, Order of Preachers, Dominican. So he's born in 1388, died in 1468. So he says here in these 2 footnotes, in his posthumously published documents, Commentari in Decretum Gratiani, commentary on the Gratian decrees, and Summa de Ecclesia, Summa of the Church, wrote in 1489, and the other one is 1519. So in this way, so that's Cardinal Juan de Torquemada, Dominican. In this way, the Pope could, without doubt, fall into schism. ... Especially is this true with regard to the divine liturgy. As for example, if he did not wish to personally follow the universal customs and rites of the Church. Thus it is that Innocent states in the Constitutudine document that it is necessary to obey a pope in all things, as long as he does not himself go against the universal customs of the Church. But should he go against universal customs of the Church, he need not be followed. And that's from Juan de Torquemada. And of course, and then another quote by Francisco Suarez from the Society of Jesus, when the Jesuits were Orthodox. Well, how long ago is that? And he was called by Pope Pius X a doctor, excellent and pious doctor, because he was so competent, and he's considered one of the best theologians of the Society of Jesus. So Francisco Suarez states, a pope falls into schism if he departs himself from the body of the Church by refusing to be in communion with her. That's obvious. The Pope can become a schismatic In this manner, if he does not wish to be in proper communion with the body of the church, a situation which would arise if he tried to excommunicate the entire church. And actually that happened, and I recommended that book before, The History of the Church by Eusebius. There's an incident in around 100 and, I don't know, in the early church, mid-hundreds. Pope Victor, I think it's a saint, Pope Saint Victor. Anyways, there was a dispute on the date of Easter, or when Easter should be celebrated. So the followers of Saint John the Apostle in the East followed the date of Easter, like with the Jews on 14th of Nisan or something like that. And in the West, according to the custom which Pope Victor got from St. Peter, it was a different date. So there was a debate, and he actually tried to excommunicate almost half the church. And St. Irenaeus, one of the greatest fathers of the church, who was himself, he advised the Pope, he can't, he entreated the Pope. You can't, again, that shows you the supremacy of the Roman See. Even when they were persecuted by Rome, the Pope of Rome, the Bishop of Rome, believed himself to have the authority to even excommunicate half the church. And nobody disputed that. They said, the East said, no, what, we can't abandon the custom we received from St. John himself. That's the custom we received. We can't abandon it. Even if you try to excommunicate us, we're not abandoning it. Anyways, through the intercession of St. Irenaeus and other fathers, Pope Victor decided, okay, fine. You can keep your festival, like the Easter date you wish, and we will keep ours, until, of course, that matter was resolved in the Council of Nicaea, I believe. But so a Pope did try to excommunicate half the church previously in the past. So anyways, so Francisco Suarez continues. So a Pope can be schismatic if he wishes to, if he does not wish to be in proper communion with the body of the church, a situation which would arise if he tried to excommunicate the entire church, or as both Cajetan and Torquemada, which we mentioned, observe, if he wished, just mere wishing, not actually doing like Paul VI, if he wished to change all the ecclesiastical ceremonies found as they are in apostolic tradition. That's what happened with Paul VI. And of course, if you go back to what I just mentioned, is the decree of anathema of the Council of Trent and the profession of faith of Pius IV, of the profession of faith of the Council of Trent, that we must hold and adhere to the received ceremonies and rites of the Catholic Church and the administration of the sacraments. That, of course, makes total sense, because if it's part of the faith, part of the anathema of the Council of Trent, of course you become a schismatic if you attempt to do that. So we do not want to be schismatic. We need to adhere to the faith of the fathers, to the rites of the fathers, which comes to us from the apostles, because it contains the faith. And you can see, as Christ himself says, by their fruits you shall know them. Ask yourself, do some research, especially younger people who have only grown in the new rite. I have pretty much grown only in the new rite. Actually, when I was younger, I would attend more of the, because we were living in the Middle East, so I'd attend the Chaldean Rite, which is from Iraq. Was Our Lady of Fatima Church had a Chaldean priest, Chaldean Rite mainly, and they would do the new Rite in French, but the Chaldean was mainly a Chaldean Rite, or would go to the Byzantine, Greek Catholic. It's called Rome Catholic, or Roman Catholic, but in the West we'd call it the Greek Catholic, Byzantine Rite, Melkite Rite. So I grew up with the new Mass, because in church and in a Catholic school we had the new Rite, the Fabricated Liturgy. So I had the new Rite in the church. Whenever we attended the French Mass, we would be the new Rite. When they attended the Chaldean Rite, with the Chaldean traditional Rite, or the Byzantine Rite. But when I came to the West, pretty much I would attend still the Byzantine once in a while. But we do have to maintain the faith. So my final advice, whenever possible, try to, if there is no other option, definitely do not skip a Sunday. Christ rose on a Sunday. We are to meet and celebrate that in church, and to receive and celebrate the divine liturgy and the sacrifice of the cross, and receive the body and blood of Christ, even in the new rite of Paul VI. The novelty of Paul VI is better than not. I try to avoid gazing at all the innovations and sacrileges happening all around me, and just receive the body and blood of Christ with devotion. If you have any other option, if there is a traditional Roman rite, the real Roman rite celebrated close to you, I know it'll seem strange, especially having grown up with it. A few times you go there, you will understand every single thing. And the more you attend it, the more you will love it. And the more uncomfortable you will find attending the new rite. And I compare it, actually, might sound ridiculous. I compare it to the way to free-range eggs to the mass-produced eggs. If you get used to good free-range eggs, with the nice orange yolk, full of taste and nutrition, and then you can't buy your free-range eggs and you end up buying the regular eggs, the cheapo stuff, or go somewhere and have an omelet with their regular cheapo eggs, you find the eggs tasteless, almost unedible. Same thing with the Mass. When you get first, it might taste different, taste weird, taste too strong. But the more you attend it with the Real Roman Rite or traditional liturgies of the East, again, if you can find a good Catholic Byzantine rite or a Coptic rite, attend it. Catholic, to be in communion with the Vicar of Christ. Even though we have a Jorge over there. But anyways, you will notice, like as I said, the more you eat the free-range, good quality free-range eggs, you go back to the old stuff, it's like, it's tasteless. Same thing for me. Because as much as possible, I try to attend the Real Roman Rite, or if not, I try to attend the Byzantine Rite. If I can't, I wake up late, or I was working, or whatever reason, I end up going to the new Fabricated Liturgy of Paul VI. I find it tasteless. Like, it doesn't inspire me. It doesn't attract me. It doesn't pull me in. It doesn't envelop me. I just sit there, maybe say the responses, and go to communion and pray, and that's it. But I don't feel fulfilled. I don't feel full. So, and the other thing, finally, I know I said it's going to be a short video. It just went on and on. But anyways, I will have a big critique of the new Mass coming soon. One of the main things is the priest facing the people. What is he? Giving his back to God and facing the audience? You're praying to God, you're offering sacrifice to God. Face God, don't face the people. Even the pagans go to a Buddhist shrine or everything, even the Jewish temple, and everybody faces, Muslims face the Mecca, and Jews face Jerusalem, and we face the East, because Christ is the Orient, and he will come from the East, and we face the rising sun. Anyways, that's for another topic. So if you can find a priest who says the new Mass in the facing East, that'll be fantastic. Anyways, and the other thing is, out of your own devotion, again, I'll do a whole video on fasting, especially the Eucharistic fast. But right now, Paul VI, our greatest destroyer of the liturgy and of the faith, imagine how many millions of people he condemned to death to hell because of loss of faith, because of the destruction of the rites of the church. Anyways, for fasting, the traditional rite, from the beginning of the church, people fasted from midnight. They wouldn't put a drop of water or food in their mouths till they received communion the next day. I know it's very hard for most people to do that. Then But actually, if you decide to do it, I find it hard to do it the first time, and then I'm trying to get into doing it myself, maintaining the ancient fast. But if you just decide, okay, instead of waking up at 7 in the morning, I'm gonna have masses at whatever 11. Okay, I'll try to wake up at say 10. Wake up to midnight. I can have some food, drink some water, sleep. Wake up at 9:30, have a shower, dress. It's already like 10:30. Go to mass, attend mass, receive communion, then come home. My great grandmother used to not put a drop of water or food in her mouth. She would put her stainless steel metal cup, and I still remember when I was a child, fill it with water, put it in the fridge. Doesn't touch anything. My great grandmother. After mass, she comes. First thing, she goes to the fridge. Living in hot countries, you remember. Takes out the cold water. I remember the taste of the water from the metal cup. She drinks it, and then let's have some coffee and cigarettes. Back in the day, coffee and cigarettes and whatever food you do. So if you can't maintain the ancient fast, Pius XII reduced the fast again, even though he continued to insist on the ancient fast, to 3 hours. You can't wait. Do 3 hours. Even Pius XII even eliminated water as breaking the fast. Again, I don't agree with any of that. We'll get into it some other time. At least do the 3 hours. It's not that hard. Drink water. I mean, even Pius XII thought, don't do just the 1 hour thing, which Paul VI did, because this is basically no fast. Because if I have an hour before communion to fast, I can eat a Big Mac and fries and a big drink outside the door of the church, or maybe like 10 minutes before mass starts, and go into mass with my tummy and burping McDonald's. And by the time communion time comes, it'll be an hour. There's no fast. So Paul VI basically even destroyed the Eucharistic fast. So do at least 3 hours for your own good. I'm not just do. Now it is up to each individual Catholic to try to maintain the faith, to search for the truth, to search for good priests, to search for the mass to be offered, because it's not for us, it is offered to God. But through its offering gloriously to God in solemnity and holiness, that we are elevated, we are divine, we are lifted up, we are not debased. Anyways, I think I have ranted long enough, but as I just showed you, Paul VI destroyed, he himself admitted the complete fabrication of his new rite. Find the ancient rites, attend them, always be Catholic, never leave the church, because there's only one holy Catholic and Apostolic Church. All right, for any of you guys not Catholic, hey, I love you all. Hope everybody finds the truth, because that's what I believe. And watch this show. Watch my martial arts things and my politics. But anyways, so as I said, it's not don't hate anybody. I hope everybody finds the truth. And I don't blame most people. I'll blame people who should know better. But for most people, we can't rely on anybody. We have to rely on ourselves, especially when we seek eternal truths, because that's our end depends on what we do in this life. So find the truth, hold on to it till the last breath of your life. All right. Hopefully I didn't depress you too much, but there's a renaissance. There's a restoration. There's going to be a fight, and there is a fight for the truth. But that is what being in the church, militant, the fighting church is. We are on the side of truth. We are on the side of Christ. We are on the side of the apostles. And God, the Virgin Mary, all the angels and saints, the fathers of the church, are on the side of truth. And truth will win. And we will not compromise. Keep the faith. Keep the truth. Do not be deceived. Search and you will find. Knock and it shall be opened to you. Open up your ears, hear the truth, and discern the truth. Know the truth, so you distinguish error from the truth and be not deceived. For Christ the King, may he reign here and for all, now and for eternity.